The wind came first, whistling through the cracked timbers of Dry Creek, like a ghost long forgotten. Then came the black clouds, boiling up from the horizon, a warning as clear as any posted sign. Men bolted shutters, women gathered their children close, and horses stamped nervously in the mud. It was the kind of storm folks would talk about for years, the kind that changed things forever. Mary Whitlock tightened the latch on her front door and cast a glance at the sky. Her hands, calloused from work, trembled only slightly as she barred the windows. She was alone now, save for Eli, her boy, asleep in the upstairs room. John Whitlock had been gone near a year, carried off by a fever no bullet could kill. Since then, Mary had fought tooth and nail to keep the ranch standing. She had known storms before, both the kind that tore the earth apart and the kind that hollowed out a soul. Tonight, it felt like both were coming at once. In town, just beyond the rickety saloons and the leaning steeple of the church, a group of men gathered in the shadow of the livery stable. Their horses fidgeted under the press of thunder, and their riders kept their heads low beneath wide-brimmed hats. Leland Haas, a man whose name could curdle milk, spat into the dust and grinned. The Whitlock place, he said, would make fine pickings on a night like this. No one would ride out in a storm to stop them. No one would even know until morning. His gang, 6 riders with hard eyes and harder hearts, chuckled low as they mounted up. They knew the plan. Ride fast, take what they could, leave no witnesses if they had to. Easy work. The widow was nothing but a ghost clinging to a house that ought to have been swallowed by the prairie long ago. Across town, in a well-built house that stood a little apart from the others, Barrett Kane sat sharpening a long, wicked knife. He wasn't like the others in Dry Creek. His boots were finer, his coat stitched from real buffalo hide. Folks called him a rich man, a land baron who didn't belong among them. But no one knew Barrett the way the West knew him. They didn't know the blood that slicked the road behind him or the truths he buried with every quiet, measured step. Through the pane of his window, he watched the gang ride out into the gathering dark. His hand paused on the blade, his breath tightening in his chest. He recognized the lean tilt of Leland's frame, the way he sat a horse like he owned it, and everything else besides. Barrett's jaw set. Some men changed their ways. Others only waited for the right moment to remind the world who they really were. He set the knife down and rose, pulling on his coat with deliberate care. Thunder cracked above as he saddled his black stallion, a beast as unruly and proud as its master. Barrett didn't ride into trouble for just anyone. Dry Creek could rot for all he cared. But a woman alone against men like Leland Haas? Some debts, even the long-buried ones, had a way of rising up when the wind howled. Mary tucked Eli deeper under the patchwork quilt, brushing a soft kiss against his forehead. He stirred but didn't wake. Downstairs, the lantern flickered against the walls, throwing long, shifting shadows. She checked the rifle, an old Spencer carbine, worn but reliable, and placed it within easy reach near the door. She was no fool. Storms made men desperate, and desperate men made trouble. The first sound came soft, a creak on the porch, almost lost under the wail of the wind. Mary froze, heart hammering. Another sound, a murmur, low and cruel. Then the unmistakable scrape of boots against wood. They were here. She moved fast, dousing the lantern, plunging the room into darkness. Her breath came shallow, steady. She cocked the rifle and pressed her back against the wall, willing her fear into something hard, something she could use. She thought of Eli upstairs, the way he clung to her when nightmares came. She would not let harm touch him, not while she drew breath. Outside, Leland motioned to his men. The storm masked their movements. The town was blind and deaf to everything beyond its own battered doors. They spread out, cutting the fence, circling the house like wolves around a wounded deer. Leland himself approached the front, fingers flexing eagerly around the hilt of his revolver. One good kick would splinter the door. He could already taste the victory. Barrett rode the ridge above the ranch, the storm lashing at him, rain driving like nails into his skin. He saw the shapes moving below, shadows against shadows, but he knew their rhythm, their hunger. He had lived it once. He nudged his stallion forward, silent as smoke, letting the roar of the storm hide his approach. There was no place for hesitation now. He wouldn't ride down to the widow's door, announce himself like a fool, and get both of them killed. No, he would pick the bastards apart. Quietly, one by one. Mary heard the whisper of leather against wood just before the front window shattered inward. She didn't scream. She didn't cry out. She fired. The shot lit the room for a brief instant, carving the invader's shape against the dark. A man's shout followed, and the heavy thud of a body falling. But there were more. Too many. Outside, a gun barked, then another, and a man's scream was cut short by the fury of the storm. Confusion rippled through the gang. Leland cursed under his breath, trying to regroup. Someone was out there, someone who wasn't supposed to be. Barrett moved like a wraith through the chaos. One outlaw stumbled into his path, pistol raised, but he didn't get the shot off. Barrett's knife found his throat, swift and sure. Another tried to mount up and flee, but a bullet caught him before he made it 10 paces. Barrett didn't waste motion, didn't waste breath. Every step, every blow, was measured and final. Inside the house, Mary braced herself for the next assault, rifle barrel steady at the broken window. She heard the gunfire outside, muffled by the storm, but she couldn't tell if it was help or harm. All she knew was that she would fight until she couldn't anymore. Barrett circled around toward the front of the house, taking down another man who broke from cover, desperate to reach the door. Only 3 left now, by his count, and the storm still raging like the devil's own fury. He caught a glimpse of Mary through the shattered window, her face set in grim determination. Good. She wasn't the kind to break easy. Leland barked orders, trying to rally what was left of his gang, but fear had taken hold. One of his men bolted, disappearing into the rain and dark. Another lay whimpering in the mud, bleeding out. Leland realized, too late, that the easy pickings he'd promised had turned into a slaughter. From his place in the shadows, Barrett watched the outlaw leader stumble toward the porch, rage and panic twisting his face. He let him get closer, let him think there was still a chance. The storm raged on, unheeding, as man and fate closed in on the widow's door. The storm came down like a living thing, tearing at the earth with savage hands. Rain battered the town of Dry Creek until the streets became rivers of mud, the roofs shuddering under the assault. Lightning split the heavens in jagged spears, and thunder rolled so deep it seemed to shake the bones of the world. Doors slammed shut, shutters were latched, and even the bravest souls huddled inside, praying the fury would pass them by. At the Whitlock Ranch, the storm was both shield and sword. Mary stood by the broken window, her rifle clutched tight, every nerve straining against the howl outside. She could see little through the torrent, only shifting shapes, fleeting as smoke. Somewhere out there, Barrett Kane moved like a ghost among the enemy, but she didn't know his name, didn't know what force had risen from the dark to fight alongside her. All she knew was that she was not alone, and that was enough to keep her standing. Leland Haas ducked under the battered eaves, cursing the weather and the stranger who had turned his easy raid into a bloodbath. He hadn't come this far to crawl away empty-handed. He barked sharp orders to his remaining men, though fear was already chewing at them. The widow's house still stood, stubborn as the woman inside it, and now there was something else, something deadly, hunting them in the storm. He motioned to Jed Carter, the only man left with any grit, and together they flanked the house, aiming to smash their way inside before whoever was picking them off got to them first. Leland's boots splashed in the rising mud as he ran, his revolver ready, his teeth bared in a feral snarl. Inside, Mary crouched low, heart pounding so loud she thought surely they could hear it over the storm. She counted her bullets, 4 left. She had to make them count. Eli whimpered upstairs, sensing the terror even in his dreams. Mary sent a silent prayer skyward, not for salvation, but for strength enough to stand her ground a little longer. Barrett watched from the shadows, rain slicking his hair to his forehead, his coat heavy with water. He had seen men like Leland before, brutal, proud, too stubborn to know when the fight was lost. He tightened his grip on his revolver, the cold iron a familiar weight. He could end this quick, but he needed the right moment, the one sure shot that would break Leland's will and scatter the rest. A flash of lightning revealed the 2 outlaws creeping toward the side door. Mary, blind to their approach from inside, shifted her aim toward the front yard, scanning for movement. Barrett's jaw tightened. If he didn't act, they'd be inside within seconds, and the fight would turn bloody fast. He moved, swift and silent, crossing the open yard under cover of the storm. One shot cracked through the night, sharp, deliberate. Jed Carter cried out, stumbling backward, his shoulders shattered. He dropped his gun into the mud, clutching the wound, his screams swallowed by the thunder. Leland swung toward the sound, firing wild into the dark, but Barrett was already moving, already gone. Mary flinched at the shots, but held her ground. She saw the shadow of a man fall and another bolt into the storm. A cold clarity settled over her. Whoever fought outside was doing it to buy her time. She wouldn't waste it. Leland snarled like a cornered wolf. He grabbed Jed by the collar and dragged him back toward the shelter of the barn, bullets be damned. If he could regroup, maybe slip away under cover of the storm, he could live to ride another day. But every instinct screamed that death was already on his heels. Barrett followed, patient as death itself. He didn't fire again. He wanted Leland to feel the noose tightening, wanted him to know that nowhere was safe now. He had made his choices when he rode out tonight. Now the reckoning had come. Inside, Mary checked the locks once more, though she knew they would do little good if the outlaws forced their way in. Her mind raced, mapping the house, the best angles, the strongest walls. She thought of John, of all the dreams they had built together, now left to her and a boy too young to bear such burdens. She would not let it be taken. Not by thieves. Not by cowards. She was more than a widow. Tonight, she was the last line between her child and the grave. Leland reached the barn, half dragging Jed behind him. He shoved the wounded man into the shadows and spun to cover the door. His hands shook, whether from cold or fear he couldn't say. He strained his eyes against the dark, trying to spot the avenger who stalked him. A crack of thunder masked the sound of a horse's approach until it was nearly on him. Barrett rode in low, his black stallion a phantom against the mud and rain. He fired once, and Leland's revolver flew from his grasp, spinning into the muck. Leland stumbled back, wide-eyed, his bravado crumbling at last. "Who are you?" he rasped, voice hoarse. Barrett didn't answer. Some truths didn't need words. He dismounted slowly, every movement deliberate, giving Leland one last chance to see the end coming. At the house, Mary watched the barn, the distant flicker of gunfire, and prayed that the storm would not outlast them. She caught a glimpse of the dark rider dismounting, walking toward the barn door with a predator's grace. For the first time that night, hope flared in her chest, small but fierce. The rain softened, just a little, as if the storm itself were holding its breath. Inside the barn, Leland backed away, hands raised halfway. His bravado had deserted him, leaving only the raw fear of a man who finally understood he had pushed too far. Barrett said nothing as he closed the distance. Leland stumbled, fell against a feed barrel, scrabbling for anything, a weapon, a chance, but there was none. Barrett leveled his revolver, and in the flare of lightning, the two men locked eyes. Outside, Mary saw the barn door shudder. She pressed her forehead to the cold glass and waited, not daring to breathe. Another shot rang out, swallowed almost instantly by the storm's dying roar. Then silence. Only the wind remained, whispering through Dry Creek like a sigh of relief, or a warning of what still lay ahead. Barrett stepped out of the barn, his silhouette framed by the last rattling strokes of lightning. The storm had spent most of its fury, leaving only a cold, relentless drizzle that turned the ground to slippery ruin. Behind him, Leland Haas lay still in the dirt, his reign of terror ended without ceremony. Barrett wiped the rain from his face and turned his gaze toward the Whitlock house, a dark fortress against the battered landscape. He knew it wasn't over. Across the yard, 3 more figures emerged from the shadows, the remnants of Haas's gang, stragglers who had waited for the chaos to thin before making their move. They hadn't fled. They had circled back like wolves, testing a wounded prey. Each man gripped a rifle or revolver, their faces grim, teeth bared against the cold. Mary saw them too. She pulled Eli close, tucking the boy behind her with one arm, while raising her rifle with the other. Her hands trembled only slightly. She had thought the worst had passed, but the night still held more cruelty in reserve. She set her jaw and breathed out slowly, willing herself into stillness. Barrett met the approaching men without flinching. His boots sank into the mud, but he kept coming, slow and deliberate. Every inch of him spoke of finality, of a battle he had already accepted long before the night began. One of the outlaws, Mick Danner, a wiry man with a scar running from temple to jaw, lifted his rifle and shouted above the rain, "You ain't talking us down easy, mister. You hear?" Barrett said nothing. His answer was the speed of his draw, a flash of movement so fast it seemed the storm had struck again. One shot rang out, and Mick crumpled where he stood, dropping his rifle into the mud. The other two hesitated, caught between terror and rage. Mary didn't hesitate. From the upstairs window, she fired, the sound sharp and sudden, cutting through the drizzle. Her bullet caught the second man, Tommy Bray, in the leg, dropping him with a scream. He writhed, clutching at the bleeding wound, his gun forgotten. The third man, a brute named Caleb Mott, let out a roar and charged toward the house, more beast than man now. Barrett moved to intercept, his boots kicking up mud with each long stride. Caleb fired wild, missing by a mile, and before he could recover, Barrett was on him. They crashed together in the churned earth, fists and fury replacing bullets and steel. The fight was brutal and close, neither man giving quarter. Caleb swung with raw power, catching Barrett in the ribs hard enough to crack bone. Barrett grunted but did not fall. He slammed his elbow into Caleb's face, feeling the nose break under the blow. Caleb reeled, and Barrett used the moment to drive him down into the muck, pinning him with a knee. Mary could only watch from the window, heart hammering against her ribs. She prayed silently for the dark rider who had come to their rescue, prayed he would not be swallowed by the violence he had dared to confront. Caleb fought like a cornered bull, but Barrett fought like a man who had nothing left to lose and nothing left to fear. He drew his revolver one last time, pressing the barrel against Caleb's temple. "Don't!" Caleb gasped, blood leaking from his busted mouth. "Please." The thunder had faded, but in Barrett's voice there was a rumble deeper than any storm. "You chose your side." One last shot echoed over Dry Creek. Barrett stood slowly, breathing hard, every muscle screaming from the brutal encounter. He wiped the mud and blood from his face with a trembling hand and turned his eyes back toward the house. In the distance, Tommy Bray was dragging himself toward the edge of town, his wounded leg leaving a jagged trail through the muck. Barrett let him go. Some men learned too late, but at least they learned. At the door, Mary appeared, rifle still in hand, her hair plastered to her face from the rain. She stepped outside, boots sinking into the earth, and walked toward him without hesitation. Eli peered from the doorway, clutching the frame with small, white-knuckled hands. Barrett stopped a few paces from her, suddenly unsure. He had faced death without blinking, but now, standing before a widow and her boy, something in him faltered. Mary studied him for a long moment. His coat was torn, his hands were bleeding, and a bruise blossomed across his jaw. But his eyes, those weary, iron-gray eyes, held no malice, only sorrow, and something deeper still. "You saved us," she said softly, voice hoarse. Barrett shook his head once, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. "Just did what needed doing." The words hung between them, simple and heavy with meaning. From the far side of town, the first weak light of dawn began to seep into the battered landscape. The storm was breaking at last, leaving behind a world scoured clean but scarred. Dry Creek had survived the night, but at a cost written plainly in the muddy streets and broken walls. Mary reached out then, surprising even herself, and touched Barrett's arm lightly. It was not gratitude alone that moved her, but recognition, a kindred spirit, as battered and stubborn as the land itself. "You got a name, mister?" she asked. Barrett hesitated. Names had weight, and as it carried burdens he had long tried to outrun. But in this new dawn, perhaps there was room for something else, something more. "Barrett Kane," he said at last, voice rough but sure. Mary nodded, as if she had known all along. The rain eased to a whisper, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Dry Creek breathed easier. But the day ahead would bring new trials, and old ghosts would not be so easily buried. Barrett turned toward the house, where Eli still waited, and Mary fell into step beside him. They walked together across the sodden yard, two survivors in a land that asked everything and gave nothing for free. The storm had not broken them, and that, in Dry Creek, was a victory hard won. The morning after the storm carried a strange stillness, the kind that settled deep into the bones and left a man wondering if the night's horrors had been nothing more than a fever dream. Dry Creek lay battered but standing, its muddy streets scattered with broken signs, fallen fences, and the grim reminders of what had been fought for and what had been lost. Barrett Kane sat on the front steps of the Whitlock house, a strip of cloth tied hastily around the gash in his side. Mary moved quietly behind him, boiling water over the fire, gathering what little salves and stitching thread she had. Neither spoke much. Words felt small and thin after a night like that. Eli hovered nearby, wide-eyed but silent, clutching the battered wooden horse his father had carved him. The boy hadn't cried, hadn't whimpered, not even when the guns roared so loud they shook the walls. Barrett respected that kind of grit, especially in one so young. Life on the frontier had a way of burning the softness out of a soul before it had a chance to root. The townsfolk began to emerge by mid-morning, drawn by the whispers that something, or someone, had turned the tide against Haas's gang. Faces peeked from behind cracked doors, wary and weathered. Doc Penrose trudged through the mud toward the house, his black bag swinging at his side, boots sloshing with each step. Mary met him at the gate, her rifle still slung across her back like a warning. The old doctor raised both hands in peace. "Word is you had some trouble," he said, his voice gruff but kind. "Word's right," Mary answered, glancing back at Barrett. "Would have been a massacre if not for him." Doc followed her gaze, squinting at the battered figure on the steps. Recognition flickered across his face, though he wisely kept it to himself. Barrett Kane's reputation had traveled farther than the man himself these past few years, carried on the bitter winds of rumor and legend. He knelt beside Barrett without ceremony, peeling back the blood-stained cloth to examine the wound. "You're lucky," he muttered. "Clean through. Missed anything vital. Won't be lifting anything heavier than a frying pan for a while, though." Barrett grunted, whether from pain or humor. It was hard to tell. As Doc set to work stitching the wound with swift, practiced hands, the townsfolk gathered in hesitant knots at the edge of the yard. Sheriff Clay Boone, a heavy-set man with a sun-reddened face, finally made his appearance, pushing through the small crowd with a look of embarrassment clouding his features. He tugged at the brim of his hat when he reached Mary. "Heard there was a bit of trouble last night," he said, as if they discussed nothing more serious than a stray cow. Mary's eyes narrowed. "Where were you, Sheriff?" Boone shifted uncomfortably. Storm made the roads impossible. Figured it was safer to hunker down till morning. Barrett said nothing, but his cold stare spoke volumes. Boone couldn't meet it. Instead, he cleared his throat and looked anywhere else. "We'll round up what's left of Haas's men," Boone offered lamely. "Make sure they don't cause no more trouble." "One's dragging himself out of town with a hole in his leg," Barrett said flatly. "Won't get far." Boone nodded stiffly and turned back to the gathered crowd, barking orders with more bluster than bite. Men who had hidden the night before now moved to help, emboldened by the light and the knowledge that someone else had paid the price for their survival. Mary watched it all unfold with a hollow sort of calm. She knew how the frontier worked. Heroes were celebrated in whispers and forgotten by supper time. Barrett Kane would ride out of Dry Creek just as the sun dipped low, and life would press on, as unforgiving and relentless as the land itself. But part of her, deep and unspoken, wished he might stay. By midday, the dead were buried, the wounded tended, and the house patched as best as battered hands could manage. Barrett sat with his back against the porch post, hat pulled low, resting but not asleep. He knew better than to let his guard down entirely. Mary came to sit beside him, offering a cup of strong black coffee. He accepted it with a nod, their fingers brushing briefly, just enough to stir something restless in both of them. "You plan to ride out soon?" she asked. He sipped the coffee before answering. "Ain't a man like me meant to linger long. Sooner or later, trouble always catches up." She looked down at her hands, the hard calluses earned from years of ranch work and too many cold winters. Maybe, she said slowly, but sometimes trouble's worth facing, if it means something good's waiting after. Barrett studied her from under the brim of his hat. The hard lines of his face softened slightly by the tender pull of something he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. Hope. It was a dangerous thing out here. A luxury most men learn to live without. I ain't much good at staying put, he said finally, voice low. Mary smiled then, a real smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. Ain't asking you to stay put, just asking you to think on it. He finished the coffee in one long swallow and set the cup down gently on the porch. In the distance, the horizon stretched wide and golden, the storm clouds breaking apart like torn sails, revealing a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Barrett rose slowly, the ache in his side a sharp reminder that he was no longer young, nor invincible. He walked a few steps into the yard, feeling the pull of the trail in his blood, the endless road that had been his home for so long. But he also felt the weight of two pairs of eyes watching him, one strong, one small, and he realized something he hadn't dared believe before. Maybe a man could outrun his past. Maybe, if he was willing to fight for it, he could even earn a future. He turned back toward the house, toward Mary and Eli, and tipped his hat. "Reckon I could stay a spell," he said, and for the first time in a long while, he meant it. The wind swept through Dry Creek, carrying with it the last traces of the storm, and in its place, something new took root, something stubborn and fierce. Hope.